The New York Port of Embarkation was an Army command responsible for the movement of troops and supplies from the United States to overseas commands. The command had facilities in New York, New Jersey, roughly covering the extent of today's Port of New York and New Jersey, as well as ports in other cities as subports under its direct command. During World War I, when it was originally known as the Hoboken Port of Embarkation with headquarters in seized Hamburg America Line facilities in Hoboken, New Jersey, the Quartermaster Corps had responsibility. The subports were at Boston, Baltimore, Philadelphia and the Canadian ports of Halifax, Montreal and St. John's. The World War I Port of Embarkation was disestablished, seized and requisitioned facilities returned or sold and operations consolidated at the new Army terminal in Brooklyn. Between the wars, reduced operations continued the core concepts of a port of embarkation and as the home port of Atlantic Army ships. With war in Europe, the Army revived the formal New York Port of Embarkation Command with the New York Port, the only Atlantic port of embarkation, taking a lead in developing concepts for operations. In World War II, the NYPOE, now under the new Transportation Corps, was the largest of 8 port of embarkation commands, the second largest being the San Francisco Port of Embarkation and the second largest on the East Coast being Hampton Roads Port of Embarkation. Originally it had the Army facilities in Charleston, South Carolina as a subport until it was elevated to the Charleston Port of Embarkation as a separate command. The cargo subport at Philadelphia remained under the command of NYPOE throughout the war. By the end of the war, 3,172,778 passengers, counting 475, embarked at the Philadelphia cargo port, and 37,799,955 measurement tons of cargo had passed through the New York port itself, with 5,893,199 tons of cargo having passed through its cargo subport at Philadelphia. About 44% of all troops and 34% of all cargo passing through Army ports of embarkation. New York PO in concept development. The formation and development of the then Hoboken Port of Embarkation early in World War I was the basis for a massive and complex Army command. By the time the concept reached its full development in World War II, as the first and by far the largest PO in World War I, NYPOE served as the model for general PO concepts and continued its role as the largest of the ports throughout World War II. Even though the First World War PO command was disbanded, the interwar years saw some of the same concept and core functions operating at the two major Army ports at Brooklyn Army Base and Fort Mason in San Francisco. When war broke out in Europe in 1939, only New York was operating as a port of embarkation on the Atlantic seaboard. As the nation prepared for conflict, a supply center in New Orleans was elevated to a PO, with another facility at Charleston becoming a subport of New York PO, with the War Department developing the concept for the fully developed port of embarkation concept operating after entry into the war. An Army port of embarkation is not simply some Army shipping terminal. An Army PO was a command structure and interconnected land transportation, supply and troop housing complex devoted to efficiently loading overseas transports. The scope of the World War II PO is summarized in Army Regulations R 55-75 Par 2b. 1st of June 1944. The commanding officer of a port of embarkation will be responsible for and will have authority over all activities at the port: the reception, supply, transportation, embarkation and debarkation of troops, and the receipt, storage, and transportation of supplies. He will see that the ships furnished him are properly fitted out for the purpose for which they are intended. He will supervise the operation and maintenance of military traffic between his port and the overseas bases. He will command all troops assigned to the port and its component parts, including troops being staged, and will be responsible for the efficient and economical direction of their operations. He will be responsible for the furnishing of necessary instructions to individuals and organizations embarked or debarked at the port. He will be responsible for taking the necessary measures to ensure the smooth and orderly flow of troops and supplies through the port. Any primary port could have subports and cargo ports. Even in other cities are temporarily assigned for movements between the United States to one of the overseas commands it normally served. In World War I, port facilities in Boston, Baltimore, Philadelphia and even in Canada served as subports of the NYPOE. An important special cargo function involved mail, in which the PO was required to ensure all mail sacks were properly labeled, met the earliest sailing date and were distributed in such a way that loss of one ship would not destroy all mail destined for a unit. For troop movements, the most critical timing factor was availability of the transports and sailing dates, so that the most effective means of minimizing delays at the port was for the PO to control the movement of troops from the home stations to the port, as well as having responsibility for ensuring troops were properly equipped and prepared for overseas deployment. Most troops were embarked destined for arrival at rear area assembly points, but when destined for landing against hostile forces, the port's combat-loaded troops under different procedures made in consultation with the force commander that included billeting combat teams together at the port and loading team equipment and supplies aboard the assault vessels for efficient unloading. In one respect, the PO command extended even to the troops and cargo embarked on ships until they were disembarked overseas through transport commanders and cargo security officers aboard all troop and cargo ships under Army control, either owned, bareboat chartered and operated a charter with operation by warshipping administration agents that were appointed and under the command of the PO. Troops embarked aboard all vessels except U.S. naval transports remained under overall command of the port commander until disembarked overseas. The command was exercised by the transport commander, whose responsibilities extended to all passengers and cargo but did not extend to operation of the ship, which remained with the ship's master. On large troop ships, the transport command included a permanent staff of administration, commissary, medical and chaplain personnel. The cargo security officers were representatives of the port commander aboard ships only transporting Army cargo. World War I operations. The Hoboken Port of Embarkation, with New York Port of Embarkation also in use by the close of the war, was formally established on the 27th of July 1917, with a port commander having been assigned on the 7th of July. The Army quickly recognized demands of World War I. Shipping overseas required unified command of operations of the water transportation branch, Quartermaster Corps and the Army camps and depots through which troops and supplies passed. In early June, Major General J. Franklin Bell, commanding the Army's Department of the East on Governor's Island, was instructed to assume the functions of the commander of such a port of embarkation as the port organized. It quickly became clear the United States' involvement in the war overseas required a central, separate, more flexible and responsive organization with direct oversight from the War Department in Washington, D. See, previous War Department planning had envisaged ports of embarkation under single commanders. The first headquarters was established at Hoboken, New Jersey, using facilities and piers seized from the German-owned North German Lloyd and Hamburg American steamship lines on the Hudson River. The first commander was Brigadier General William M. Wright, serving from the 1st of July to the 1st of August 1917. On the 1st of August 1917, Major General David C. Shanks assumed command as the ports of embarkation came under the embarkation service until the 27th of September 1918, when ports were made coordinate agencies directly under the General Staff. The port was briefly under command of two Brigadier Generals, William V. Judson and George H. McManus, from the 9th of September 1918 until General Shanks resumed command on the 5th of December 1918. In the early stages of the port's operation during World War I, the cargo functions were located in Brooklyn and New Jersey, with troop movements largely out of Hoboken, where the command was located, and nearby Manhattan piers seized from German lines with passenger facilities. By war's end, the NYPOE, again under Major General David C. Shanks, had expanded to a staff of 2,500 officers, embarkation camps, hospitals, 12 piers and 7 warehouses in Hoboken. In Brooklyn, 8 piers and 120 warehouses, of which 6 piers were also Bush Terminal Company assets, and 2 Army Supply Base warehouses, and, in the North River, Manhattan, 3 piers covering a total of 57 acres. 3 embarkation camps, Camp Merritt having a 38,000 transient troop capacity, Camp Mills with 40,000 capacity, and Camp Upton with 18,000 capacity came under the direct command of the Port of Embarkation, while Camp Dix remained under War Department control but served as an embarkation camp for the port. The command included 4 embarkation hospitals and 5 debarkation hospitals, 1 general hospital and 1 auxiliary hospital, along with 2 base hospitals. The ports of Boston, Baltimore, Philadelphia served as subports, and the Canadian ports of Halifax, Nova Scotia, Montreal and St. John's, Newfoundland as subsidiary ports under the NYPOE. The need for more permanent dockside Army passenger warehousing and shipping facility was recognized, and the Brooklyn Army Base, redesignated the Brooklyn Army Terminal 1 October 1955, was constructed from existing terminal and docking facilities in Owl's Head, Brooklyn, not far from Fort Hamilton. Beginning in 1918, the port managed the return of the American Expeditionary Force from France during 1919 and of the American forces in Germany, 1919 to 1923, as well as post-war transport related to support of forces in Puerto Rico and the Panama Canal Zone. In December 1919, USAT Buford homeported at the port, transported Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman along with 240 people considered communists and radicals from the NYPOE to Hango, Finland. General Shanks' command and the NYPOE were discontinued the 24th of April 1920, with functions turned over to the General Superintendent, Army Transport Service, Army Base Brooklyn, though the command had changed and the port itself reduced in size from the wartime years. To the new Army terminal continued to be referred to as the New York Port of Embarkation, with ships homeported at New York PO, Army Supply Base, Brooklyn, NY, as were the transports USAT America, USAT American Legion, USAT Chateau Thierry, USAT Great Northern, USAT Hunter Liggett and others. In later stages and post-war years, with the permanent Brooklyn facilities becoming the center of operations, New York Port of Embarkation replaced the former term and was the official term during World War II. Between the wars, with official discontinuation of the command structure at the end of World War I, the port, along with the ports at San Francisco and New Orleans also being used by the Army, became a depot for personnel and supplies for the overseas facilities it served without coordinating functions. The command was under a superintendent, Quartermaster Corps, Army Transport Service, reporting to the Quartermaster General. On 6 May 1932, the New York Port of Embarkation was reactivated with command at Army Base Brooklyn, consolidating command of the Atlantic branch of the Army Transport Service, the New York General Quartermaster Depot at the Army Base, and the overseas replacement and discharge service at Fort Slocum.